BC's premier news network. Tonight we're going to be talking about the First Nations Infrastructure Fund. There has been an important policy proposal to mitigate BC flooding. We will be hearing from experts and community members to discuss the new policy. Most people do not experience the impacts of infrastructural failure during climate events, but the same cannot be said for many rural Indigenous communities who deal with unique climate events like flooding. The First Nations Infrastructural Fund Guide is a proposal-based program by the federal government to help with infrastructural development. With this program, Indigenous communities have to apply for funding in order to build climate resilience infrastructures such as drainage systems or dikes in the case of flooding. Many of these requests get denied, and not many people know about these gaps, as seen from our street interviewing team.
All right, thank you, Samantha. So now we're going to conduct a couple of street interviews. We're going to see how much people truly know about the FNIF. Let's go. Excuse me, sir, could we interview you?
Yeah, sure. About what?
About the First Nations Infrastructure Guide. What's your name, by the way?
Matthew.
Matthew. Okay, perfect. So regarding getting Indigenous funding, how many eligibility requirements do you think it takes for like a First Nations community to build resilient infrastructure?
I don't know, maybe 2?
2 requirements?
Yeah, that should be pretty easy, right?
Yeah, you'd think so. So actually, there's about 8 mandatory eligibility requirements. Yeah.
Wow.
How does that make you feel?
That's pretty surprising. I'm quite shocked. I would assume for something that important, it should be a lot easier.
Conduct a couple. So today I'm here with Claude, and Claude has agreed to interview as well. So, regarding the FNIF policy, is it true or false that emergency warning systems are funded?
I would think it's true. I mean, it seems like a pretty simple necessity.
For sure, for sure. What if I told you that they were actually not funded? How would that make you feel?
That's crazy. Honestly, it makes me feel kind of scared. I mean, I could imagine just chilling in your house and then suddenly a mudslide or a flood comes in and you got no idea what's happening. So it's definitely quite scary. I feel like something like that would never happen in big city.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, Claude.
Rishin, a climate policy expert, is working to revise this program and create a policy which offers some critical suggestions.
The way the FINF policy is now structured, Indigenous communities have to apply for funding and follow a strict but vague eligibility criteria. Projects are required to be achievable and follow a reasonable timeline, but these evaluations are based on westernized and urban understandings. Unique aspects of Indigenous communities, like their social and historical past, alongside their rural locations, make their needs for developments more complex. As a result, our team is proposing a new policy that mandates a refined eligibility criteria and changes the system to accommodate the needs of Indigenous communities rather than flat out deny their requests.
To add to this, Canada's 2022 Independent Auditors Report for Emergency Management in Indigenous Communities found that 3.5 times more funding is allocated towards emergency climate response than proactive preparedness or prevention. For every $1 invested in climate preparedness, $6 is saved for emergency response.
Thanks, Samantha. Yeah, that's a shocking statistic, and it shows that we're not doing enough to prevent the impacts of climate events in Indigenous communities. The current FINF reflects this discrepancy, as emergency warning systems for climate events are not a coverable expense. For flooding, emergency warning systems play a major role in reducing severity by giving communities more time to react. Also, they give residents necessary information to prevent prolonged harm and chronic stress known as weathering. Our new policy will ensure expenses like warning systems are included in the FINF and allow requests to be accommodated year-round instead of the current cutoff in September. This will ensure Indigenous concerns are not ignored and be more responsive to their dynamic and situational needs.
David, an Indigenous policymaker, shares an Indigenous community member's concerns.
Thank you, Samantha. So yes, an unnamed Indigenous community member had the following to say about the revisions. The member said, and I quote, "I think it's great. We used to worry about sending our proposals in because we worried they might think it's unrealistic or take too long to implement. One time, our proposal for drainage pipes was even denied, and it felt like they didn't hear our concerns. As a result, we suffered some mudslides that season, which ruined some houses, crops, and even hurt a family. The member also reports that because of the policy, emergency warning systems were not implemented, which could have warned them about the extreme local heavy rainfall that weekend, which ultimately led to the landslide. They wished that these systems were in place earlier so that they could have taken appropriate measures to protect their crops, reinforce their homes, and clear bodies away from the impact zone. As a response, a large allocation of funds was directed in response to the emergency and not to the prevention of it.
While many are optimistic about the revision, community member Chris also cautions against some of the downsides.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at some potential downsides. The current policy is that proposals are only accepted annually. However, Indigenous climate concerns aren't static, they're situational, and communities can suddenly have the need to build resilient infrastructure. We all know we can't predict climate events a year in advance. It would be like trying to predict the World Cup winner as of today. It doesn't really make sense. So I can see why an accommodation-based system can help. But switching to year-long open accommodations can overload requests, which could delay implementation efforts. The volume of requests could be overwhelming during climate events like windstorms or flooding. Also, emergency warning systems are expensive, so by considering this a coverable expense, I'm worried that it can quickly exhaust our budget. So my question is, where will the extra money come from?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. And while switching to an accommodation-based system can induce longer wait times, we will still maintain the FINF's priority guidelines to assure that those who require the funding the most urgently will receive it. Also, although investing in emergency warning systems may be initially expensive, by increasing climate preparedness, they can save money in the long term and reduce the costs of structural and health damages. Ultimately, we argue that these revisions are necessary to ensure that Indigenous communities have equitable access to climate resilience and that their lived concerns are truly acknowledged. These revisions will not only help to mitigate and reduce the impacts of climate events, but also prevent injustices that occur when climate risks intersect with long-standing inequities.
While the First Nations Infrastructural Fund program helps the Indigenous community when it comes to flooding, the revised policy benefits the Indigenous community in preparation for flooding, makes them feel heard, and mitigates the long-term effects of climate events. Thank you for listening to BC's Premier News. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thanks, Samantha. Yeah, that's a...
Concerns. As a result, we
It sounds good though, it sounds good.
This program by the federal government to help with infrastructural development.
What? No. No.
Okay, last one. I promise.